Hello, listeners or viewers or however this podcast might be getting to you. This is Dr. Bernie, and I'm just here with a quick message before you hear this wonderful interview that Dr. Richard and I had an opportunity to do with Dr. Scott Furtwengler. While this wasn't our first interview, it is our first interview with a lot of technical difficulties. We kind of mentioned it at the beginning of the podcast, but we had some internet difficulties, and it led to some a little bit of sound distortion, a little bit of video distortion. We really didn't know about it until the end of the podcast and end of the recording after we were all done. And so we thought we would go ahead and put it out, even though we're going to have Dr. Scott back for another interview in the future, talking about a different topic. We thought we'd go ahead and put this podcast out there because it is chock full of great information about student success and motivation and how to help us overcome some of the challenges that students encounter as they are progressing through school and into college and on with their life. So we hope that you enjoy this podcast. Stick with it. I know that the audio and video is a little bit troubling at times, but it's great information, and if you have any questions about any of it, you can get in touch with us, or you can get in touch with Dr. Furtwengler directly. We have his contact information in the show notes. So enjoy the podcast. Sorry for the technical difficulties. We are constantly working to improve all of that, but hopefully it'll be better next time. But again, enjoy the podcast. Thanks. Whether you're looking for answers to specific life questions or just seeking to become the best version of you possible, welcome to the Mental Breakdown and Psych Reg podcast, where we offer insight, information, and strategies based upon research and years of practice as clinical psychologists. So sit back, have a listen, and get connected with our hosts, Dr. Bernie Wilkinson and Dr. Richard Marshall. Welcome back for another episode of our podcast where we have a great guest today.
We do,
Richard.
We do.
We're really excited. You know, we kicked off our relationship with Psych Reg just earlier this week, and we had that great opportunity to interview Dennis, who's the webmaster extraordinaire of Psych Reg, and one of the first people that he recommended us to interview actually is who we get to meet today.
Right?
Yeah, it's very exciting. We're really happy to have Dr. Scott Furtwengler with us today. And before we introduce him, and Dr. Scott, before you come on the air with us, Rich, why don't you tell us a little bit about Dr. Furtwengler?
Happy to do that. Dr. Furtwengler is the Director of Institutional Research at Brazosport College in Lake Jackson, Texas. In addition to his role at Brazosport, Scott serves as a lecturer in educational psychology at the University of Houston, where he earned his PhD in educational psychology and individual differences, specializing in learning and development, and also as an evaluator for Apollo Analytics, LLC, which he founded. Scott's research interests include human learning, psychosocial development, theories of motivation, achievement goals, performance, engagement, intelligence and creativity, program evaluation, and the interaction of environmental, genetic, and psychological factors on student success. Scott attended Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, where he earned a BA and MA in English. He has served in higher education for over 20 years, predominantly as administrator for post-secondary honors programs at several institutions, including SIUC, Miami-Dade College, the University of Tennessee, the University of North Florida, and most recently as the District Dean of the Honors Program at San Jacinto College in Houston. A founding board member of the National Association of Fellowships Advisors, he is a writer, a musician, parenthetically, which I want to know more about, close parentheses, and a former high school volleyball and basketball coach, parentheses. I'd like to know more about that too. You can learn more about Scott's background and research at www.scottfurtwengler.com and follow him on Twitter at sfurtwengler. It's good to meet you. I know there's a dot. It's not a dot.
It's not a dot.
I know that.
Okay.
Bernie questions my technological savvy.
Welcome, Dr. Furtwengler, to the show.
It's good to meet you finally.
Thank Thank you. Good to meet both of you, Richard and Bernie. Great to be part of this.
Well, we're really happy, and of course, one of the things we do on the show is we like to be very open about challenges that we had, and we have had you on the line for about 40 minutes now, trying to get all of our technology working, and so hopefully everything works well as we get going and have an opportunity to talk.
It makes me think of the dark side of the moon, where we lose radio contact. But here we are.
Well, we're back.
That's right. Well, so you have a great website that has all kinds of information in it, and when I was reading through your website and looking at all of your different interests and the work that you're doing, you seem to really be interested in student success. How did you get started with that? Like, what drew you to being interested in researching student success?
Well, I would say probably like most students that I've come in contact with the last 20 years, I did not know what I wanted to do when I was 18 years old. I had an interest in storytelling. My first major was film production. And when I learned that our senior project cost thousands and thousands of dollars, this is back in the day when you actually used film, nothing was digital at the time. So you couldn't rewrite over something you had just shot. You shot the footage and you wasted a lot of money on stock that you didn't use. So I switched my majors to English, and, because storytelling is a big part of English. And I still studied film as an English major. I went on to get a master's degree in it, and I worked as a teaching assistant for Dr. Rick Williams at Southern Illinois University, who taught classical and he also happened to be the director of the honors program. We worked very well together, and he had an opening for an assistant director for the program, and he encouraged me to apply, and I did. And I served at the program for about 9 years, moved on to serve as an administrator at other honors programs, and I had this question for those 9 years that I was at SIU, and then when I got to the University of Tennessee, that question, the urgency of answering the question became more primary for me, and that is, why do some students, even honor students, fail, and some students who don't have certain advantages succeed? What's going on there? At the time, I was the associate director of the Chancellor's Honors Program at the University of Tennessee, and I started the master degree program there in sports psychology. And that was a great introduction to non-cognitive constructs or factors that are integral in athlete success. And at the same time, in the honors program, we were working on developing an office that was dedicated to guiding students in the application process for nationally competitive scholarships like the Rhodes and the Marshall and Truman and the Mitchell. And at the same time, all these things were converging. I was reading Moneyball by Michael Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're familiar with the story at all, you remember that what the guys out at the Oakland A's were doing were getting away from what we call the meaningless statistics and looking at different stats. So what were the stats that really mattered? We found out that RBI really wasn't a meaningful statistic with regard to somebody's player on the team. And I wondered, well, are we seeing the same things in academics? Are we students who have a 3.5 and great SAT scores, are they, how meaningful are these factors in their student success?
Mm-hmm.
And even if they are, what are some of the factors we're not measuring?
Right.
And so that's when, right around that time, I was very interested in the research by Angela Duckworth with regard to grit and resilience, and Carol Dweck with fixed and growth mindsets, and wondered how that's measured and how that plays a role in student success. From there, I came to Houston as Dean of Honors and accepted into the educational psychology program at the University of Houston, and that's where I really wanted to learn how to answer those. So that's what I did, and that's what I'm doing. I'm learning more and more each day, but that's where it all converged, really, were those questions that I had.
Wow, that's great. And you can see how your experience evolved and changed over time based upon these exposures or experiences that you were having. As you encountered more students, your interest kind of followed what you were experiencing, it sounds. Exactly.
And it's interesting too. So now I teach a course on the history and philosophy of the foundations of educational psychology, and we go through many researchers from the past 100 years, influential. And what's interesting is, none of them ever, as kids said, I want to be an educational psychologist. It was something that something sparked their interest down the road and over them. So I think that's kind of how it happened for me as well.
Scott, I have a question about those, with these non-cognitive factors, because they're important to us as well. And I wondered if are there certain non-cognitive factors that you have found to be more highly associated with student success than others? Which ones have you found to be most salient?
Well, I think the two that I mentioned, Dweck's notion of fixed and growth mindset is really something that grew out of a couple other constructs, one by Weiner called attribution theory and another called achievement goal orientation. She kind of took those and made them a little more accessible to the public, what those are. The other, again, would be Duckworth's construct of grit, which really is about self-discipline and resilience in the face of adversity. These are both huge non-cognitive factors that I've seen where students, if they do not have and it's not only coming from them, but also their support system. If they don't have a support system that holds them up and says, you're gonna face some adversity in class or out of class, you need to stick it through. You need to stick with it. The other thing, the growth or fixed mindset, that's, I see that with everything. You're both clinical psychologists, correct?
Right.
So, this sense of if you've had clients, I've had family members and things had issues with to what they attribute their success or failure, and we all know the person who blames everything on everybody else. That I failed the test because the teacher doesn't like me, or the school just against me, and I'm not saying that those aren't always that those aren't legitimate concerns, but the students who are successful get beyond the blame game. They look at I'm even if the teacher doesn't like me, I know what I can do, and I know what I need to do to get beyond that. So, mindset, that idea of grit are two very important constructs.
That's fantastic, and we've talked about grit a number of times on the podcast. And I was smiling as you were talking about, especially that last part there, because one of the things that I know that I work on with my patients a lot is the idea of internal versus external locus of control. We can blame others for everything and say, well, if the teacher liked me, I could have been successful, or if this or that. But at some point, success comes from taking responsibility for yourself and saying, I have some control over some of this, and I can work harder, or I can do this, or I can do that, and make things different for myself.
Right.
So
exactly.
Now, do you work from a particular perspective as it relates to how you define success when you're working with these students? Do you have them identify particular goals ahead of time, or is it just individualized? How do you work with the idea of success?
Well, it's a good question, because success is very malleable.
Yes.
As director of institutional research, I report a lot of data to IPEDS, which is the Integrated Education. I forget the acronym in total, but it's the federal agency that we report measures of success to.
Right.
We also report to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. So one measure of success for the coordinating board might be, do students complete their first 15 hours? How soon do they complete their first 30 hours? Do they stay in school? Do they retain? And IPEDS has similar measures, but those aren't necessarily measures that students are thinking about. They're not thinking about getting through the first 15 or 30 hours. They're often thinking about getting through one class.
Right.
So success is it's a movable feast, and what we do is for them to have a meaningful education and to graduate, hopefully on time, without much debt, and to be able to find a job within their discipline. So one of the things we're doing right now, where I work is what are called guided pathways, and that is with community colleges. In the past 30 years or so, when you go to a community college, a student is overwhelmed by the amount of choices. We're to create meta majors and get basically a degree program within that meta major to keep them focused, so they're not choosing what we call cafeteria style courses, and so they meet not only the measures agencies consider measures of success, but also we can show the student you are on the path to success, because we're going to first take freshman composition your first semester, not in your sixth semester.
Right.
Because you need those skills to build on, and when you hit these other classes. So combining these ideas of what our state and federal agencies consider success, and getting to where our students are with their goals, their needs, I think is really important. So, we might look at a school district and say, well, they only have, a high school district, and say they're only graduating 80% of their students, or we might say, only 30% of their students are going on to higher ed. Those those are two important measures, but it's not the whole story.
Right.
So we have to think about what are measures of success for an institution, and what are measures of success for an individual.
Right. That's great.
That's yeah.
Now, one of the things that seems to be a major talking point now when we think about success and we think about what students are accomplishing and what they're doing is the idea of how a lot of our students, especially those that are in the millennials, they come to us with somewhat of a sense of entitlement. People talk about and things and those types of worldviews, and there are those who blame sort of the culture of participation trophies and this idea that they're given success as opposed to students having to earn success. Has any of your research touched on any of that, or what are some of your views of that perspective?
A really good question, because it comes up often with millennials, and a lot of people have opinions, but I haven't seen that much research, and I just may not have found it, linking associations, making associations between a child who received participation awards, and then later, if they adopt or espouse this idea of entitlement. I haven't seen any research either way on that. Now, the research that I am aware is, and you both maybe have a background in this too, of punishment and reward.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that punishment doesn't always work that well. The stick doesn't always work in work and school, where the carrot is a much better stick. And the thing with we're to be very careful with it. Rewards work best for repetitive tasks. So if you have, I always, when I think about this, I think of the old Lucy show where they're doing the chocolate on the conveyor belt and trying to fill the boxes. So that's a repetitive task. And if you want individuals to perform better on that task, rewards are great incentive, and especially if they're spaced out and intermittent. Okay, but rewards in terms of participation awards, not always a good thing. I not only coached high school volleyball, but I was director of a youth volleyball league in Illinois as well, and I see why in a developmental league, it's born out of good intent. This idea that let's give everybody a trophy for this work. I think much better. For instance, let's say in the state of Southern Illinois, not a lot of boys are exposed to volleyball. So in this youth league, when I had young boys come in, there were probably, and it was a co-ed. There were boys and girls playing on the same team, but usually the girls had some exposure to volleyball, and they were at the age where they were growing a little taller than the boys. So the boys weren't that good,
right,
in this situation. So I think what's more valuable to them is to encourage them to stick it out, to get to the end of the season, to have fun, and at the end, as a coach, not just handing them a trophy and saying, nice job, but talking with them, saying, hey, I know you when you started out here, but you stuck with it, and that is really important to the team, to you, and I'm really proud of you. So those types of words, encouragement, mean a lot more than a trophy. And students down the road, they're going to remember the encouragement that a coach gives them over some trophy that they stick in their basement closet 20 years from now.
That's right. And, one of the things that we talk about is, participation trophies may work really well with younger children. When we have kids 4 or 5, maybe up to 6 years old, because we want them to have fun, because they're not, we can argue the point whether they're actually playing the sport at that age or if they're just out there being exposed to the environment and the milieu. And so giving participation trophies then gets them back. And so, but once they start getting a little bit older, as you said, unless we need some incentive to get them back is sort of the idea. And at that point, though, it serves a different purpose.
And I think it's important, that we let parents know and others that it's important to instill intrinsic motivation rather than extrinsic motivation in these students.
Right.
Had a great story quickly from my sports psychology professor at the University of Tennessee. He told a story about a old curmudgeonly guy up next to his house, and his kids were playing baseball now, just coming and doing pickup games, and he couldn't stand it because they were he didn't like the noise, he didn't like anything. So what he started doing, he went out, watched the kids play, and after they were done, he gave each one of them a quarter, and said thanks for playing. And he did this for a couple weeks. They expected a quarter after each game. More kids would come. And then he just stopped paying them. They asked where the money was. He said, that was it. I'm not going to pay you anymore. Well, they quit playing. So they had this intrinsic motivation just to have fun and get out there and do it. And then this reward was introduced, this monetary reward. And it shifted the motivation to that. And I think we have to be really careful as parents and teachers and coaches about the types of rewards that we offer.
That's a great story. That's perfect.
I love that story. Alfie Cohen would love that story. He's speaking of motivation. Quick question about motivation. Usually, I worked with Claire Ellen Weinstein at the University of Texas for a while, and we struggled with this whole idea of motivation. Is there really any way to increase motivation in students? Teachers are often told, well, if she was more motivated, she would do better. But how in your work, how do you answer that question? If she was more motivated?
That is, it's one of the number one issues in education or even in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a huge issue, and it's so complex. And when I hear the term a motivational speaker,
right,
I just kind of laugh because they paid for a few hours, but are they really going to motivate them to action, to do something? And that, the motivation, there's intrinsic and there's extrinsic, and both work, but intrinsic works much more on a long-term basis. So, teaching college students is much different than teaching grade school and high school students, and depending on what type of school you're teaching at too. I mean, with college, most of the students are there because they choose to be there, and they want to get a degree. And sometimes other circumstances get in the way of even their best motivation. At the high school and grade school level, something I just saw recently, you may have seen it too, there's a school where teachers noticed that there was some absenteeism, and they found out that this was a low-income district. And they found that weren't coming because their families didn't have access to laundry, and they were wearing often the same clothes more than a day or two, and they were embarrassed by it. So rather than suffer the embarrassment, they just didn't go. This is a different, completely type of. This is where some teacher might say, "Oh, they're not motivated," or something like that. Where there's a lot more going on there. We found that a sense of belonging is integral to maintain that motivation. So students who feel like they belong at the school, who feel welcome, and that's at the college level too, are more likely to maintain that high level of motivation and succeed. So, and those are just some examples of something that's going on at home and how it affects motivation. Those are just examples. Motivation is very complex. I might be motivated to do very well in my ed psych class, and then when I get to my hierarchical linear modeling class, I might be a little overwhelmed, and that's where something like academic. Logical theories, but when it comes to stats, I might not be as might not have such a high self concept.
Right. Yeah. Gotcha. Well, shifting gears just a little bit, because I know we're pushing on some time and everything. I wanted to make sure that I asked you a little bit about some of your other work, where you seem to have some interest in working with talking about high school students. And this time of year, of course, high school students are getting ready to start that transition, especially high school seniors are getting ready to start that transition for preparing to go to college. But you have some interest in that area as well, working to help these kids with that transition.
Right. What I've been doing a few years is helping students, and this is just the admissions part, just helping them work on their admissions essays. If you've had any experience reading any type of admissions essays, whether it's for graduate programs or college, it can be a tedious process as a reader, because so much of what you read is generic and kind of the same thing. Their grades and their clubs and organizations, and I try to get them to make a connection between themselves and the school. It's like a going on a date and just talking about yourself.
Right.
That's not going to be a date for anybody. You want to know about the other party. So I really encourage them to get to know the professors in their program, because they can do that online now.
Right.
If you're a junior or senior in high school, you're interested in English, you can go to each college's English department and look at the faculty, understand what their specialties are, and if you have any similar interests.
Right.
It's very important, and it gets back to that sense of belonging. If you step on campus that first day and you realize that let's say you're a vegan and all your professors in the English department have a barbecue team, there might be some distance there. You want to know that you share. So I think it's really important for students to do their homework, find out as much as they can about the college, the department, the faculty, and this is even more important for first-generation students. I was a first-generation student. My parents didn't know how to navigate the system, and I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying, so was have me guidance in that area. So I think for first generation students, it's even more important for them to know their schools. And as much as they might like to go into college without a major picked, I would recommend that they pick one, even if they change it 2 times. Pick one so you have a focus going back to the guided pathway. That'll keep you on track.
Those are that's some great advice for students, because I know that also being a first generation going to college, you walk in generally blind. You have no idea what's going on. So, reminding our students to do their homework and learn about the faculty that's great advice. That's great.
And I love really like that guided pathway concept. I think that's really critical.
Well, if you think about it, and I had it for my doctoral program. There were a sequence of courses that I had to take. With med school, it's the same thing. With law school, it's the same thing.
Right.
And usually with the community colleges, it's a sequence. You take the sequence of courses. And Tennessee, a few years ago, was very early in adopting that model for other programs, and it's been very successful. So, if we can get schools, universities, colleges to think more about offering that degree plan, that guided pathway right off the bat, I think we're, all those measures of success we talked about earlier, the numbers increase in those measures when we have these types of interventions.
That's great. Yeah, when I was I used to be an assistant professor at the University of South Florida, and had the opportunity to work on the presidential something. I only remember the presidential part because that made it sound fancy. But we worked with freshman students, and I think the statistic was about 30% of freshman students came in as an unspecified major. And I think your point about, the guided pathway, come in with some idea of something, even if you change your mind later on, I think is a great perspective for the students.
Right.
So, that's fantastic. So, before we wrap up, any other bits of knowledge, anything else that we didn't ask you about that you would like to share with listeners, or to get us to think about things a little bit more?
Well, there are at least one thing, and I recently saw, it was in the past few days, that there was some legislators in Arizona where they were the legislator the content of the bill was to prevent college professors from talking about social injustice or associations between socioeconomic status and race, and forbidding any mention of white privilege or anything like that. And first of all, I don't think that's going to pass. Second, I think it would probably be challenged at court level regarding First Amendment rights and academic freedom. But I can't, in my position as in educational psychology, the research we disaggregated by race and socioeconomic status, and we know some of the disservice we've done to low-income groups and different races in this country, and I don't think we can talk about. I certainly couldn't do my classes without bringing up the research in those areas.
Right.
So I don't know if I'm going to be arrested someday for talking about those things. But one of the things that it reminded me is that we as researchers, in educational research, have got to do a better job of getting our research out to the layperson, to the parents, to the teachers. We haven't done a good job of that as educational researchers. We're concerned, with publication, things like that, but we really need to get out to the practitioners, the grade school and high school teachers, who get thrown a new intervention at them every year and wonder what's going on, and to the parents, and especially to the politicians. We don't do a great job in explaining our research to the legislators and politicians, and we need to do a better job of that.
I don't think we could agree more. That's almost exactly, our mission when we started our podcast, and some of the writing that we do is that, we both work in academia. Richard is actually still a full-time professor at the University of South Florida, and teaches and does research, and our goal is to take a lot of that research and really, the reason we call what we do the mental breakdown is because we're trying to break it down for people so that they can better understand, so that, moms and dads and couples and kids can take what we're talking about and implement it at home and apply it in their day-to-day life. And I think what you said is great.
Right. One of the many things that ties us together is translational research. To translate it for parents and teachers. They're not going to read these journals. They're not going to access these websites. And it's up to us. I think I absolutely agree with you. It's our obligation to translate this. If you have any ideas about how to access legislators, that's the one area where we're really falling short, is we're not getting the message to educators. Somebody's getting their message to them. We're not getting our message to them. And I take whatever advice you have on that one.
Yeah, that's I guess it would be, get active, process. If there is somebody, a teacher or a researcher who is dynamic and charismatic, encourage them to run, even if it's for the local school board.
Right.
When my background was in English, I had really no understanding of the research side and social to do, and it really changed my outlook on things. And I respect and appreciate the people who serve on school boards at local, state levels, but one thing I've learned, having a master's degree in English, so that means I had 12 years of public school or school, and then I had so years of bachelor degree and master's degree. I was not an expert in education. So going through and getting a high school diploma or a college degree does not make anybody an expert in education. Even now, there's so much that I don't know. With a doctorate in educational psychology, I think there's just an overwhelming amount of research that people on our boards, there's no way they can access all of that.
Right.
So it's important for us to break it down for them.
Right.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, Scott, we have really appreciated you joining us tonight and weathering through our technological issues, and there are so many other things that I know that we would like to talk to you about, and so this is hopefully going to be the first of many times that we'll talk and share your wisdom and what information you have to share with folks. But before we let you go, do you mind passing on ways for people to follow you, to keep up with what you're doing, and to read more about your research and your work? How could people follow you?
Sure. Again, on Twitter at @Furtwengler. They can see what I'm up to. I try to post something positive each and every day. Also, my personal website, www.scottfurtwengler.com. They can look at that and see what kind of research I'm up to. Because academics, we speak at conferences, but we're usually speaking to other researchers and people in our area. I love getting out to high schools and public libraries and talking to parents and those types of environments. So I'd love to visit with any high school or any public library where they would have me.
Sounds great.
Good.
Well, again, we really appreciate it. I'm sure that our listeners and everybody out there will jump on, follow you, and hopefully, our idea again is for getting more people to join in on the conversation. The more people that are talking about it, the more likely we are to find a better solution. So,
and when you're ready to return for your first return podcast, let us know. We're going to put you on.
I appreciate what you guys are doing. This is great. It's I hope more people listen and convey that translational aspect of it. That we're not speaking too much jargon, and
right.
I hope your listeners understand. And next time, I'd love to come back and talk about my work in creativity because. I'm very motivated about that too. So.
Okay, you're on the list.
Sounds great. Well, again, thank you very much. And for our listeners, we really appreciate you listening today. And until next time, I'm Dr. Bernie.
I'm Dr. Richard.
Stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.